Hello and welcome to Groton Matters, a show where we discuss important issues in depth, in a fair and balanced manner, uh, all in the interest of informed decisions. I'm your host, Jack Petropoulos, and today we're talking to the candidates for Select Board for 2021, an election that occurs on Tuesday, May 25th, here in Groton. Running for a single seat this year are three candidates: Craig Bennett, Peter Cunningham, and Vikram Narayan. A good portion of today's questions came from viewers. In the interest of a manageable duration, we're not able to get all of the questions in, so I apologize ahead of time if you submitted a question that we couldn't cover, but I hope that you'll find a broad range of questions that touch on things that you're interested in. We intend to spend about 30 minutes with each candidate. Each candidate will more or less get the same questions. There'll be some questions customized for each candidate. The show will be indexed so that you'll be able to see what it is that we've asked all the candidates and the timestamps associated with those, and you can jump ahead to those questions if they're particularly important to you. I hope that you'll watch the whole show because there'll be a lot of nuance in what's said, and I think that's important to your assessment of the candidates. I really hope you'll find the show valuable, and one of the most important and valuable things that I think we have to offer is comments. Once you've viewed the show, if you have some comments on what you've heard here, I hope you'll offer them. They can be made anonymously, as long as they're relevant and respectful. Those comments can be made at grotonmatters.com. And I think they can be one of the most important pieces of this show and of people's responses to the candidates themselves. So I'd like to introduce Craig Bennett. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. And also thanks for your candidacy. I know it's not easy, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So before we start, or at least start with the questions, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Okay, my name's Craig Bennett. I'm a lifelong resident of Groton, fourth generation, been here for 49 years. Educated in Groton school systems. I've been a chef for more than 35 years. Have followed Groton politics for many years, basically from the outside, watching meetings, attending Zoom meetings, things like that. Very familiar with what's going on in town currently, what has gone on in the past, and the whole gamut. I think that I can offer a different set of eyes and a new view for the select board that coming from someone who's lived here for 49 years and seen numerous changes in the town, I think I can very much benefit the community and the town of Groton.
Great. Thanks for that intro. So let's start off with a number of questions that are sort of about you as a person or your particular views. We can go into some topical areas in a little bit, but I want to start off with what you feel is the single most important and unique attribute that you have to offer.
Single and most important attribute.
And
unique. I would say probably my length of time in town. My family's been here since my great-grandparents. And again, I've been educated in the Groton schools, have seen a lot of things change in terms of the local political scene with who represents the town, the times before we had a town manager, the times since we've had a town manager, different land acquisitions and land conservations, things like that I've seen, and basically being a newcomer to public politics, and I think that a lot of people that are involved in politics have a career-like position, and I think that I can bring a fresh perspective to the important needs of Groton and surrounding communities as well.
Okay. How will you distinguish yourself from your opponents and from other board members in terms of policy?
In terms of policy, let's see. The other board members, having been following meetings and basically gaining an understanding of where they come from and what their priorities are. I think that I can meld very well with them and be in a cohesive board and work, productively together. Um, Even though I don't know personally all the members of the board, I feel like I do from watching meetings and things like that, and getting their input on certain issues and their reactions on others. As far as the other candidates, really, I only know Peter from his time on the board. Dr. Narayan, I've been exposed to him as a candidate's night. Um, and Peter, I've seen for many years on the board. I believe he was on the board for 21 years, and he's been out for about 4 years. So I'm familiar with his style as well.
What board member do you find yourself? I mean, you've watched a lot of these meetings, so there has to be an opinion here. I would think. What board member do you find yourself agreeing with most often?
With the current board?
Yeah.
I would say it's probably a toss up between Allison and Josh.
Okay.
They seem to be pretty much a lot of times on the same page as far as the benefit of the town and what's the better decision for the town and taxpayer.
Making decisions on the board can be tough, and sometimes making controversial decisions can be tough. What's the most controversial position you've ever had to take as a professional, and how important was it, and how did you go about it?
You see, controversial in terms of I've been in management for years. I've been a chef and restaurant manager for years, and in that time, you've had to discipline certain employees and sometimes terminate certain employees. That is never easy, regardless of the performance that brought them to that point. It's never easy, but it's necessary. It's necessary for the betterment of the business, whether it's a restaurant or anything else, and sometimes the betterment of that person as well. What brought you to that point? I wouldn't say it's necessarily controversial. It's sometimes just a necessity in the way things have to go.
Fair enough. How will your business relationship with Select Board Member Deegan impact your ability to work together and independently from him?
I don't see it as an issue. I've known Josh for a lot of years. I've plowed snow with him for a lot of years, and I've known him for a better part of a decade. We don't agree on everything. There's a lot of things that we don't agree on, but we can discuss the pros and cons and our own points of whatever the discussion may be, and have a respect and understanding for each other's opinion or evaluation. I've been running this by him for years and have kicked around the chance to run for select board, and I've asked him what I could here and there, and he said, if you want to run and you think you should run and you can make a difference, then do it. And it's been a years long discussion that we've had together.
Because this is the most common question that we got, I'd love for you to just explain what it is that is your business relationship. You mentioned plowing together, but is that the entirety of your business relationship?
No, we're in the process of starting a food truck, which again has been a long time dream of mine, and also a long time discussion with him for the better part of probably a year and a half before COVID hit. I've worked for mostly independent restaurants my whole life. I have a small catering business myself, which basically hit the wall when COVID started. And food truck has always been something that I was interested in. And, after long discussions about it and his business acumen and my restaurant and business acumen as well, it seemed like a good match. And we're in the process, and it's been a long time. I have a truck currently that's in process in a garage right now. So we were hoping for about May, but we're probably shooting for closer to the end of June, July.
Good luck with the business.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the economy or economic issues. Do you believe the tax burden is growing growing proportional to residents' ability to pay? And if it's not, if you don't believe it is, what is causing that? So this is really a question of how well you understand the, the, the growth of taxes and residents' ability to pay. So what's causing it, and what would you do about it?
Okay. Let's see, what's causing it? There are a lot of um, higher end homes in Groton. There's a lot of high money homes. I believe that the median last year was 540,000 or so, median home price. Um, Taxes are going to keep going up with maintenance costs in town as far as roads and things like that. It's hard to introduce something that's going to slow or stop the tax rate from going up. I think it's um, crazy. I've owned my house for probably 2004, I believe, 2003, and has just watched the property taxes go up from there, and it's outrageous. And I don't think that there are a lot of town services that you do get for what you pay in taxes. How to fix it? Um, I think that, as discussed at candidates night, I mean, some things that maybe a possibility of looking into are the recreational marijuana in terms of the dispensary or things like that in town. Looking closer at Indian Hill coming online, and possibly a ticket tax there. Some form of negotiation about a pilot where they're a nonprofit. Something like that could help in terms of more income for the town and more revenue streams for the town. But as far as property taxes being halted, lowered, anything like that, I just don't see it coming with the amount of building and how hot real estate is right now in the town, in the state, in the country for that matter. I think that things are just going for above and beyond asking.
Well, let's just touch on that real quickly. It's just a quick follow-up. How does building and high-end homes impact property taxes?
Um, the the building of higher income homes coming in makes the same tax rate, but at the same time it's more tax revenue going to the town. But there needs to be um, some form of, not abatement is the word that I'm looking for, but I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Some form of change that in a way that the property taxes could be slowed, I guess at best. I know we're in need of a new Flow Road, new elementary school. There's always projects coming down the line that are going to increase property taxes. But I think that collaborating with other board members and FinCom and possibly other town boards to come up with some type of collaborative plan that may be beneficial to, I hesitate to say lowering property taxes because I really don't ever see that happening, but
okay, all right. So sort of on the same vein, employee wages and benefits represent 60% of our budget and are growing faster even than we're allowed to raise taxes without an override, largely due to the rising cost of benefits that are rising at a phenomenally fast rate. Do you see this as sustainable? And if not, what will you do about that?
I don't know if it would be sustainable. Health insurance benefits are constantly going up. We are in need of more town employees that always get hired, whether it be highway department, town hall, what have you. With them comes the cost of salary and benefits. And I don't think at a town level there's anything that can much be done about decreasing the amount of benefits, the amount of benefit cost. So I really don't know how you would decrease that. It's nationwide, it's worldwide, really. That healthcare costs and therefore benefits for employees go up and up constantly.
Tough problem.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the contribution of local nonprofits?
Contribution in terms of what?
Their contribution to the town in terms of the overall contribution. There are many contributions that they make, financial and otherwise, and just it's an open-ended question.
I think that some of the nonprofits, as far as private schools, I don't find their contribution equal to what it should be. Like I mentioned before, Indian Hill is a nonprofit. It's an enormous facility. And there needs to be some form of solution to the town, whether it be a ticket tax or a pilot plan or something like that. As far as the schools and everything, no, I don't believe that their pilot payments are in line with what they get for services, and I think it needs to be evaluated.
Thank you. So we'll move on to sort of community-related things, and this is local as well as a little more than just local. Should the select board be involved in promoting or discussing or involved in any way with larger social issues such as Black Lives Matter?
Should they be involved in discussing it?
Yeah, in any way.
I think at a town level that there needs to be some form of discussion about those issues. As far as their own personal opinions, you can express your opinions for the betterment of the town during board meetings, things like that. But it's a fine line if you're a citizen and you have your beliefs about whatever movement and political issue or social issue is going on at the time. Yes, I feel everybody should be able to express that, but I think there's a line between expressing it as a citizen privately and expressing it and not carrying over to a board seat or a town government level like that.
Understood. Great. So moving to Prescott, the Prescott Community Center, there have been 4 votes to fund the preservation of Prescott at town meeting. What does that history of town meeting approval of funding imply to you about the community's willingness to support the effort, and how will that guide you with regard to future considerations regarding Prescott?
I think at the time when it came up about possibly selling Prescott, and the community did not want to sell Prescott, I believe that is a statement of keeping the building and keeping the familiarity with the property. And as far as what they're doing now, I've been through Prescott. I've seen the programs that they're offering and everything like that, and the different offices that are in there, the different businesses that are operating out of there. I think it's beneficial for the community. I think it's beneficial for Groton. I think it's beneficial for other towns possibly as well. I don't know where we will be the next time about funding Prescott. I mean, they're funding themselves and they're keeping above water and everything right now. And I think that they're putting a tremendous amount of effort into preserving that building and offering beneficial programs for Groton and other communities.
Great. Next, we turn to a question about the town seal. Do you feel there are residents who do not feel represented or even perhaps feel misrepresented by the use of the Bible in the town seal? And if you do, is that acceptable to you?
I think that there are people that do feel misrepresented or not represented by the town seal. I think it goes way beyond Groton. I think it goes to the state flag having a Native American on it. I think that right now we're in the middle of a enormous quagmire, I guess, for what is offensive. Some people are offended by a lot of things. Some people are offended by minor things. And I just think that minor, obviously being my opinion, but I think that opening the can of worms in terms of what's offensive to everyone, I don't think that day will ever end. You will find something that is offensive to anyone, whether it be a flag or a street name or anything like that. And being from a mixed race family myself, there's other things that I may find offensive that you may not, or a number of people may not. Like I said, living here my whole life, that seal has been there my whole life. Have I ever really thought of the Bible being on there? Not until it was brought up um, in trying to remove it from the town seal. I never really gave it a second thought, and I've seen it forever. You know, on the flag, on police officers' badges, on town documents, on everything. And I honestly never gave it a second thought until it was addressed.
It's an interesting topic. So let's move on to conservation. How do you feel about the rural character of the town, and to what extent do you support spending more money to preserve undeveloped land?
I love the rural character of town. That's what has kept me here, besides family. That's what's kept me here my whole life. I live abutting conservation land. It's beautiful to have trees and woods and walking trails and animals and everything like that out my back door, um, as, as well as different places in town, whether it be Surrenden Farm or Gibbet Hill or anything like that. I enjoy the open spaces of town. I think that they bring a lot of people into town for those reasons, as well as destinations, restaurants, and things like that. But I think that some of our conserved areas that are beautiful, vistas and scenery, is it brings other people into town, it brings them out of the city, or it brings them from another direction, and they're beneficial. Um, do we, how much of the land do we want to conserve? Um, to me, as much as possible without bankrupting the town. I think that there are some areas that have been looked at that need to stay preserved, and I don't want to see Groton developed like certain other surrounding towns have been, that are a shopping mecca and hotels and things like that. I don't want that. I'd rather preserve what we have in the open spaces and the wooded areas and trails and rail trail and things like that.
So we'll move on to housing. How important is affordable housing to you, and what are you willing to do to advance it, assuming that it's important?
It is important. Groton is behind in terms of where we need to be percentage wise for the state. Um, just looking at what is available, there's very little affordable housing available. I believe we lost 4 units in the fire on 119 by the middle school in Flora. I think it was 4, and it needs to be evaluated. I think everyone that is involved. I know there's a housing summit coming up, and I think that everyone that is involved in different areas get together and roundtable their ideas and maybe come up with some things to look at, some properties to look at, some options to look at in terms of getting more affordable housing in town. I don't think it should be placed in the outskirts of town or anything like that. It needs to be around town services and be convenient and be available for the people that live there to be able to live their lives and flourish, and not be on the outskirts and away from everything that's a town service.
When you say we're behind, I think you're referring to the target of 10% of housing stock should be affordable. What makes that 10% figure the right figure? Is it applicable to all municipalities? Is the right figure for Boston, the right for Brookline, for Groton, for Orange, Massachusetts, Beckett, Massachusetts? What makes that the number?
That's the number that the state is saying based on incomes and things like that, and the number of houses, I believe. Do I think 10% is enough for Groton? Probably not. I think it's probably low, in my opinion. I know other towns have done a lot more in terms of affordable housing, and we have a lot more options. Um, I don't know where the the decision comes from in Brookline or Boston. More people, a lot more population, a lot more difference in economics, but I do think Groton's behind.
Okay. So taxpayers lost $400,000 on Boynton Meadow, and the select board and or the trust has been reluctant to share a lot of the documentation about that initiative. Do you believe the public should have access to that documentation?
I think so. I think it was 412,000, but it's semantics. Um, I believe that the public should have access to it. I do not understand why they're not going after the $412,000 that we invested that we never saw anything for, and they're just dropping it. I do not understand that. I don't know why, and I don't agree with it.
Okay. So moving on, really this is sort of touching on another topic we talked about earlier, similar to policing. Is there a need to examine policing in America and more locally in Groton?
Examine. In some cases, I know there's been, newsworthy events of things that have happened with police. I don't believe all of them were justified. I have friends that are police officers and have been for a long time. I don't think it's fair to lump all police into a category that needs to be evaluated in terms of them being fair and being, not being racist and things like that. And I don't think that it is that widespread of an issue. And what I know about Groton and Groton's police force and the chief and everything, I don't think it is an issue in town as far as it is in some other towns and cities. But again, I don't think it's that broad of a spectrum that all police need to be evaluated and marked as in terms of their beliefs and their fairness to society. And they're here to serve and protect, and in my experience, that's what they do.
Thank you. We'll sort of close on the topic of select board performance. What do you think are the most urgent issues for the board to address, and what are the obstacles to addressing them?
Urgent issues. Like we discussed with Indian Hill. Indian Hill is coming online shortly. And like I mentioned before, there is not been talk of a pilot plan for them. They are tax exempt. It's an enormous facility that is going to change a lot of layout in town in terms of Old Air Road and that intersection there, and just all kinds of other businesses in town that it would impact. It would impact restaurants, it would impact the police and fire, EMT. I think there needs to be an urgent discussion with them about a pilot plan or some other solution for it. Like I said, a huge facility, and if it produces even a fraction of what they say it's going to produce in terms of performances and spectators, we might want to look at the ticket tax. We might want to look at a pilot plan, or some other alternative.
Didn't the town meeting already discuss a ticket tax?
Discussed it, I believe, but it's I don't know where the board of selectmen stood on it. I'm sorry, the select board stood on it. I don't exactly remember what the vote was for the town with the ticket tax, but I know it's something that needs to be done for. It should be for every ticket for every performance, I believe, not cherry picked examples of a population of how many people are going to be there.
Yeah, I think the ticket tax idea at town meeting met with a lot of resistance and some sense of the difficulty of getting it implemented. It doesn't mean it can't be done.
Sure.
But I think it did not get a really warm reception at town meeting. And the pilots, that's always a challenge, but I wish all well in that endeavor. The last question is, how would you like your performance to be measured if you are elected?
Let's see. I am an upfront person. I have a great sense of humor. I have good management skills and management style, and I think that the cohesiveness that the board has been working with for the last 4 or 5 years is a good starting point. There's not any infighting and public drama and call-outs and things like that there have been years ago. And I think that continuing that and just continuing the open relationship with the board and, of course, with the town, and being upfront and being accessible to answer questions. If I have the answer to them, I'll answer the questions. If I don't have the answer, I'll find the answer and I'll get back to them with the question. But basically being honest and being accountable for what we accomplish as a board, because there's no one member of the board. It's the whole board that is responsible for everything at the end of the day.
Well, that kind of wraps it up for us, Craig. And thank you very much for providing these answers and for the dialogue on the couple that we extended a little bit. I appreciate your time, and I wish you good luck in the upcoming election.
Thank you very much, Shaq. I appreciate it.
That wraps up our interview with Craig Bennett. Now let's go forward and have an interview with Peter Cunningham. So I'd like to welcome Peter Cunningham to the show. Peter?
Thank you, Jack. Yeah.
Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Sure.
Before we get started, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to introduce yourself to voters.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I do have a brief, and I hope Ash keeps me on time here, but I have an opening statement I'd like to read. So my name is Peter Cunningham. I'm running for the open seat in the Groton Select Board. Having previously served on the board for 21 years, I have a wealth of experience that I believe will be beneficial to Groton and the challenges the town faces as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. Chief among these is a comprehensive understanding of local governance and how to leverage support at the state and private level for important local initiatives. Examples of these that have been involved in the past include the restoration of the old leatherboard mill on West Groton to River Court residences, where I worked with the developer to negotiate a tax increment financing agreement and help secure state historic preservation funds to complete that project. Also, the preservation of Gibbet Hill, where I worked with one of the trustees of Lawrence Academy to secure a donation from the Academy, and then also the state open space grant. The Surrendon Farm preservation, that was something I was involved in when I was on the board, and I was the recipient of the Groton Conservation Trust Environmental Award in 2008 for negotiating that. And I also chaired the Planning Committee more recently and was later chairman of the Building Committee for the new Groton Center, which has just been completed. And then going back to shortly before shortly after I moved into town, I worked with the State Historic Commission to secure money to stabilize the foundation of the First Parish Church. So since my previous tenure in the Select Board, I've remained active in nonprofit organizations that benefit our community, notably the Friends of the National River Rail Trail and Squancook Greenways. Both of these groups work to actively support and create our local rail trails, which are widely recognized as positive recreational assets to Groton. I've also had the privilege of serving as a Select Board representative to the Montechusett Regional Planning Commission, where on behalf of the town, I worked to secure a grant for an environmental assessment of the old Squancook Sportsman's Club in West Groton, thereby saving the expenditure of $18,000 that was appropriated at the fall 2020 town meeting for that purpose. In short, since leaving the Select Board in 2017, I continue to remain active and involved in town affairs. I recognize some of the hard challenges Groton faces going forward, especially the impact of property taxes on townspeople. I believe there are opportunities Groton has passed over in developing other forms of local revenue that do not impact the property tax base, and that I'm committed to developing if elected. The experience I bring to the table is worthy of your consideration, and I respectfully ask for your support at town election on May 25th. So thank you.
Thanks for that intro, Peter. Indeed, you have quite a history, and you are unique in the candidacy in that respect, in exactly that respect. And we'll talk about some of the things, some of the questions, obviously, I think we'll draw on some of that experience. And hopefully other questions will draw on other things that are not necessarily requiring of experience here. But the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what's the most important and unique attribute that you have to offer, you personally have to offer to this role?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and it goes back to some of the past experience I have a pretty good understanding of the relationship between town government and other either private or governmental agencies we have to interact with, and how to leverage and get support for initiatives that the town wants to undertake. I've always had good working relationships with our state senator and state representatives, and have been able to advocate for the town. And then also for some of the other nonprofit organizations I've been involved in, sort of recognizing, I think, what some of the needs are. I think the example of the environmental cleanup over the Squanicook Sportsman's Club and getting the $38,000 grant to help fund the phase 1 and phase 2 assessment of that site was something that was kind of laying there on the table, and someone needed to pick up the ball and run with it. And I have a fairly good understanding of the right buttons to push and how to sometimes be a pest to get attention and to make things happen.
Well, have the right buttons to push. It's an interesting sort of attribute to point out. I think it can be valuable. So how do you distinguish yourself from your opponents and from other current members of the board in terms of your policy views?
Well, I think I'm not that familiar, I suppose, with my opponent's policy views. So that's something that would have to wait and until we learn a bit more about that.
But other members of the board as well.
Yeah, no, I understand. I heard your question, and I think other members of the board, I think in general, my policy perspective is one, sort of on the operational level, to try to make things work and to try to work collaboratively with the boards, other board members where possible, to try to address what some of the issues are that present themselves. I mean, typically, and I think this year going forward, coming off the COVID pandemic, is going to be, very focused on, how we manage the budget and how we prioritize those areas in the budget that we're going to, fund, and those that we may have to make, hard decisions on. I mean, that's going to be, I think, pretty clear. And I think a lot of communities are facing that going forward after coming off the year we just had.
Okay. This might be a hard one to answer, but I think it's useful because viewers sort of see it. It's sort of the way viewers look at the select board. What current board member do you find yourself agreeing with the most?
There are different times, I think, when I've agreed with members of the positions they take, and I do follow it fairly closely. And then there's sometimes when I don't necessarily agree with what they're doing. So I suppose I would say I've agreed with all 5 members at one time, and then at other times I've probably disagreed with them with their positions. And I don't think it's necessarily productive to pick out one and identify it that way. And clearly going forward and wanting to work, if I am successful at town election with other board members, I don't want to, single out one, board member as someone I couldn't work with. I feel I'd be able to work. And in fact, I have worked in the past with many members that are currently on the board.
Okay. When you think about your past on the board, what's the most controversial position that you took as a board member in the past, and how important was it, and how did you go about sort of moving that forward?
Yeah, I think probably going back, when I think about it, there was a situation involving our fire department where it was sort of transitioning from more or less an all-call department to sort of a hybrid department. And there was a lot of pushback at that time. And I was the select board representative to a group that was the fire department study group, for lack of a better term. And we met with the firefighters and had to sort of try to move that issue forward to the recognizing the reality that the call model was not working to the extent that we needed it to as a rapidly growing community with a lot of pressing emergency services need, and there was a need to bring on full-time firefighters. That was pretty difficult, and there were some very heated controversies and I think conversations there. But I think the way I worked through that was just keeping up with the process, sort of trying to identify the needs and trying to make sure that the call members were not feeling isolated or unappreciated in what the new emerging model of a hybrid department is going to be.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does your career as a state employee give you a special appreciation for town employees, and how does that benefit taxpayers?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think as a public employee, at the end of the day, we are in fact public servants. So you need to pay attention to the public. You need to answer phone calls. It also, I think, gives me an understanding of the hierarchy within state government and how to get results and get feedback from state agencies when you need to do that. I worked recently, in fact, as a member of the Friends of the National Rail Trail. We worked with Senator Kennedy's office, and we were able to get a $650,000 earmark in the recent state transportation bond bill for the National Rail Trail. There's some work that needs to be done on that trail, and this would help cover some repair work and potentially engineering costs to redesign and rebuild the trail. It's at a point where that needs to happen. But knowing how to contact the right people, understanding how state government works, I think was helpful to me in making that happen.
So we've sort of covered a lot of sort of more personal things right now, or things that are unique to you as an individual. I want to go to some really focused topics, including the economy or economic topics. Do you believe that the tax burden in town is growing at a proportional rate to taxpayers' ability to pay those taxes? And if not, what does that mean, and why is it happening, and what would you do about it?
Well, yeah. No, I think it's disproportionate, and I think we hear that, and we hear people saying that they're very concerned about the property tax, and it's no great secret what's causing that. I mean, there's been a lot of new capital projects the town has taken on. The Groton Center project, the highway garage, the fire station. I mean, there are a number of things. Things which had been neglected for years, but nonetheless things that the community took on and is paying for. And now, obviously we're facing the new project for the Florence Roach School, and that's definitely going to increase the tax burden. I'm really committed to trying to develop other sources of revenue to help hopefully offset some of that. And I think that's the one thing I really want to focus on is if I am successful in getting elected to the board.
So anything that's going to offset that growth, it's going to require a specific amount of revenue. It's not like you can have a cookie sale. What kinds of revenue sources might be that meaningful?
Well, I'm thinking there's one out there that I think the town doesn't have a great many opportunities to generate new revenue. We have rooms tax, meals tax, a few things like that. But I think we really passed on an opportunity a couple of years ago, and we voted to opt out of the recreational marijuana sales. And I look where that's happened in other communities that have done that, and they in fact are realizing some significant revenue, which then goes into their putting together their local budgets. So I think that's something I'd really like to revisit at this point.
Okay, so to this end, really, maybe there are other drivers. You talk about capital projects and stuff, but employee wages and benefits represent 60% of the budget and are growing at a rate much faster than our ability to raise taxes, largely because of the benefits portion of that. Do you see that as sustainable? And if not, what would you do?
No, I mean, I think that's a reality, and that's something, in fact, I think has been recognized over the years in the negotiations with the various bargaining units in town to increase the amount of the share of payment for their monthly benefit. This year, in fact, the employees did take or did not take increases they were supposed to get. So I understand that, and I think it's fortunate they did that. They try to work with us during a very difficult budget. But every year that's going to be a negotiation, with the bargaining units, and I think you need to try to work in that direction. And then also, I think on the town side, we do the best we can in working with the collaborative we work with. I believe it's been Amanda Shobo for our insurance, and to try to negotiate the best rates. Maybe at some point in the future that would involve looking at joining up with the group insurance commission such as the school has done with their bargaining unions to realize a better rate on that.
Yeah, I don't know if that has resulted in a lower growth in benefits than the municipal side, but I'm sure it'd be interesting to look at that. How do you feel about the contribution that local nonprofits are making to the community, both financial and otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I believe there's more that could probably be done. I guess I would focus at this point on the Groton School and their contribution to the to the community. And they do make a pilot payment. They have increased that, I think, a little bit over the past couple of years. But the one thing that in the past they were more open to doing was making their facilities available to people in town. And specifically, there was a program, a swim program, that used to be offered to Groton seniors that actually had therapeutic benefit to many seniors that used it. And that was terminated. And I think that was unfortunate. And that was one of the, I know in the past, is one of the things the school would tout is what they do in addition to just their pilot payment, that they made their facilities available. So I'd like to, perhaps revisit that at some point and have a conversation with them about that.
Moving on to more community-focused things, should the select board be involved in promoting national social issues, Black Lives Matter, for instance?
Yeah, I'm really not a big fan of that. I think it can become too divisive at times, and I think the primary function of the select board is sort of managing local affairs, local governance, local budgets. Now, there are ways that you can, I think, speak to those issues through the policies you establish within the different, departments that interact with the public. Obviously, I think the police department is one where you can, emphasize that message through policy and working with the leadership to implement policies that are respectful of diversity and people within the community. But I don't believe, and I think it's counterproductive when the select board becomes a platform for speaking on national issues. I just think that becomes too divisive.
We'll talk about some other sort of related things like that later, but to the Prescott School, there have been 4 votes at town meeting funding initiatives at Prescott. To what extent do you think that implies anything about the town's willingness to support this project, and how will you be guided by those votes as you consider future issues relative to Prescott?
Well, I think what's interesting about that is that there in fact is a plan and there's an agreement with the Friends of Prescott to operate that program, and it really appears that they are doing a good job in meeting the terms of that agreement going forward. And I certainly support that. It's a resource for people in the community to use that. There are programs they offer there that are very beneficial and that people in the communities subscribe to and participate in. So I would be supportive of that going forward. I think if it reached a point where that was no longer the case and there was a significant financial drain on the town or on the town budget because of the that operation, then that's something we'd have to revisit and talk about at that time. But to date, it seems to be functioning well, and I would also note functioning well, sort of in spite of the the past year and the COVID pandemic, which has really derailed a lot of things. So kudos to them and to the work they're doing there.
Great. The town has talked about the town seal a bit. And I'm just like to ask, do you think that there are residents who don't feel represented or even misrepresented by the use of the Bible on the town seal? And if that is true, what does that mean to you? Is that acceptable?
Well, I believe there's certainly people that feel that way, but I believe the end result of that discussion was to maintain the seal. I think there's certainly a lot of things that we could go back and look at that people might, in hindsight, take exception to, and I'm not sure how productive it is in going back and revisiting and trying to undo all those things. And again, I think that's something that it becomes. In fact, I think it introduces another element of divisiveness if we are attempting to do that in things. I don't think that the issue is, was that significant that it deserved going back and undoing. There was a similar conversation, Jack, as you recall, with the Crusader emblem at the high school, and that is icon, I guess, of the school and stuff. And the conversation went on for quite some time, and was quite divisive, really. I'm not sure what the end result of that was, if it was productive, if it did anything to advance, understanding within the community or not. And so I believe that issue's been discussed enough, and it's been settled by townspeople.
Okay. Moving to conservation, how do you value the rural character of the town, and to what extent do you think we should continue spending money to maintain open space?
Yeah, I think we've, I think our inventory of it's pretty obvious. I think inventory of open space is pretty significant. I would not be in favor of any, large, Surrendon Farm type purchases of open space at this point. I simply don't think we could afford it in the context of other things that are before us and that are perhaps more important. I do support funding the conservation fund, which the commission may use from time to time if there's some parcels that come up, and that's largely funded through CPA money, as you know. But taking on any significant capital debt to fund any large purchase, again, I don't think that's something I would be supportive of, given the current inventory we have, which is a real asset to our community.
Yes. So moving to housing, how important is affordable housing to you, and what are you willing to do to advance it?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important. I supported the article of town meeting to study, look at some of the town-owned parcels. Although, as you're aware, some of that work's already been done. There were previous studies that look at that. I think the most bang for our buck going forward may be able to identify parcels that are privately held and to perhaps reach out to some of those landowners and see if there's a way that we can partner with them, maybe through the Affordable Housing Trust, also using some of the state programs that might be available to in fact build affordable housing. I think at the end of the day, the goal of most folks is to see more affordable housing available to introduce another element of diversity into our community.
I guess I'll leave it at that. There is quite a discussion as to whether people really do want affordable housing in our town, but I think that could take up a whole show.
Probably could, but yeah, I'm
not challenging your perspective here. I'm just
I'm thinking from my, and it looks like we had a little time, but from my involvement over the past years, we see that, and I know talking to their housing coordinator, there certainly is a need for that, and I think there's a way to do it. And I can think of a couple of projects in particular that stand out that fit in well and would work well in the community in certain places.
So taxpayers lost $400,000 on the Boynton Meadows project, and we could again spend another show talking about that project, but there is currently a reluctance on the part of the town to release all the information relative to that investment and to the efforts to recoup it. What do you think about the withholding of that information? And in fact, are taxpayers entitled to all of that information?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not, I guess, privy, as you're aware, there were some executive session discussions on that. So I'm not privy to what some of the overriding legal issues are. I believe taxpayers are certainly entitled to that information. But stepping back and looking at that project and when it was undertaken, there was, I believe, some understanding, and I think some of the post-analysis of it was that the Affordable Housing Trust was making an investment at that time into that project. And sometimes some investments might, work out the way you hope they work out or the way they were presented. Sometimes they may not for a number of mitigating circumstances. But this was an investment. I don't think there were any ironclad guarantees that the Affordable Housing Trust is going to see, that money returned plus then a profit again on top of it. Yeah.
So I guess it is hard for taxpayers, and we do have some time, so we could go deep on a couple of little things, but it was an investment. I think taxpayers have a hard time viewing it as an investment as much as they see it as the spending of their tax money. And I think that the big question that many are asking right now is, yeah, I made this investment, or yeah, you took my tax money. I'm entitled to see what happens or what happened to that. And the thing that they're reacting to is that there's just this wall that says, no, you're not entitled to see that. Or you might be entitled to it, but I'm not going to give it to you. And I think that has people a little upset. And well, I know it is because we get these questions. How would you speak to taxpayers about their entitlement?
Yeah, you know, as I said, I mean, I understand that. I don't know, and I'm not sure if many of us are privy to why that is. I mean, I think generally, for the most part, you know, the board members try to be, you know, forthcoming about what's going on and what was behind some of those decisions, or what may be having and a you know, wide range of stuff that comes before them. But sometimes there are things they cannot talk on. I don't know what that is. I mean, there may be some compelling legal reason that that information can't be disclosed, and that, I guess that's unfortunate, but that does come up from time to time in situations, and you need to respect that. But I agree that the information should certainly be out there and people should understand it. Why the project, the Boynton Metals project, went the way that it did.
Okay. Is there a need to examine policing in America? And if so, is there a need to examine policing in Groton?
Well, yeah, I think there. I wouldn't say there's a direct connection. I think clearly we've seen, and unfortunately we see almost every night in the news, an example of where policing has, you know, taken a tragic turn in a number of communities, and that's unfortunate. I think we're somewhat fortunate in Groton in that we're a little bit closer in terms of our relationship as a community with our police department. And I believe they tend to be more responsive to, you know, to input from the community. And I believe, you know, reviewing their policies and procedures, that they are attempting to be, you know, more responsive to the community. I would be open to looking at personnel assignments, and with personnel that are more focused on sort of a clinical or I guess social, I hate to use the phrase social work, but social work intervention in some of the situations they may encounter. And having worked in that profession for 38 years, I can appreciate that. I can also appreciate the dynamics and the risks that are involved in responding to highly charged emotional situations, particularly domestic violence situations. But I do think that might be helpful. And I actually think it's something that the responding officers would be appreciative of, is that level of support, and not having to, you know, butt heads from the onset in a situation they encounter. But I think, getting back to the essence of your question, I do believe we, you know, benefit again from having a closer connection with our local police department, as opposed to what the case may be in some of the other communities where we see incidents of, you know, police, you know, not responding appropriately in situations, very rapidly getting carried away and becoming tragic.
The last topic is board performance, and really sort of a general question, if you will, submitted by a viewer, and that is, what are the most urgent issues for the board to address, and what are the obstacles to addressing them?
Well, I think, you know, as we talked earlier, I think one of the most, compelling issues is the impact of property taxes. I mean, people are very concerned about that. So how do we manage our budgets going forward, and what do we do to try to develop, you know, other sources of revenue that don't impact the, you know, the property tax base? So that's sort of, you know, 30,000 foot level of what some of the things are, and then getting down into what the specifics are of how you deal with that are going to be the challenges that you need to work on, you know, in collaboration, because, you know, you're just one member of the board. You need to work with your other board members. But those are the challenges we're going to face going forward. But I think that clearly is the biggest one. And as you know, it's going to get even more significant when the debt service on the Florence Roads project starts hitting the tax base.
Yep. Do you think that issue gets enough attention today? The impact of taxes on taxpayers by the select board?
Yeah, I think, I mean, especially, I mean, the agenda varies, as you know, what you're dealing with from day to day, which is actually one of the interesting things about being a board member. You're not just all focused on, you know, one topic as you might be if you're on the planning board or conservation commission or school committee. It's really varied. There are a lot of things that come up. Clearly during the budget process from late December up until town meeting, I think that is a major focus, is what the costs are, how you're going to manage the budget, and how you're going to try to, control costs and limit impact on the, on the property tax space. So during that time, I think it gets a lot of attention. Short answer to the question.
Yeah. Okay. And last question is, how do you think, or how would you like your performance to be measured? How would you like people to measure Peter Cunningham's work at the end of a year or at the end of your term?
Yeah, I'd like to say, boy, he had some great ideas, and my taxes went down. So I think that's that would be a good one.
Yeah.
And I'll go back. I'll go back again. I know, and I've done a fair amount of research on this. I do believe there's a way to generate that, and I think revisiting that decision to opt out on the recreational sales of marijuana is something that could certainly help the town. And it may not be immediate relief, because you need to, if approved, you need to then find a vendor that's willing to come in and do it and take it on. But I know in other communities, in fact, over in Air, they realized over $500,000 in revenue from a percentage of sales of recreational marijuana. And that's significant money.
Yeah, I apologize. I chuckled a little bit at the idea that taxes will go down, but I can appreciate that that's really a metaphor for tax burden being eased somehow.
Correct.
Perhaps not rising at the same rate. Yeah. That wraps up our interview with Peter Cunningham. Now let's talk with Vikram Narayan. Vikram, thank you for taking the time to be here, and thanks for offering to run for select board. It's not an easy position, and running itself is a challenge, and becomes even more challenging as you get up to select election day. So before we start our questions, I thought I'd offer you an opportunity to introduce yourself to viewers.
Well, I appreciate that, Jack, and of course you would know what the select board entails, so I appreciate your service prior. My name is Vikram Narayan. I'm running for select board in Groton. I've been here for 10 years. I'm a family man. I have 2 school-age children who attend our local schools here and are doing quite well. I'm running in order to be an effective spokesperson for the concerns of the people of this town. I think the status quo needs to be revisited and maybe tuned up a little bit. As an anesthesiologist, my practice is kind of fine-tuning people for surgery, but in this aspect, I hope to fine-tune our town and get more efficiency in our systems and helping people, as many as possible. That's the goal. And that's me.
Great. Thank you for that. It's an interesting background and interesting perspective.
Thank you.
We'll start on talking about sort of things that are personal to you or about you. What do you feel, Vikram? And I understand that you like to go by Vic. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. Okay. Vic, what's the single most important attribute that you feel you offer here?
I think it's what I mentioned before. As an anesthesiologist, I have to make quick decisions on people's lives, whether or not they're going through major surgery. And those are big decisions, but the thinking behind making those decisions is very similar. All problems can be solved, by exploring the data, and I'm well versed and able looking at the risks and the benefits to each decision and try to make the most well-informed. We're not always going to be right, but we should at least make our best guess. If you're going to place a bet, put it on the one that's over 50%.
Well, sort of to that end, how will you distinguish yourselves and other board members in terms of policy?
What do you mean by that?
Well, are there particular policy positions that others might not share, or policy approaches that you will take to making policy?
I think it's all based on the risks and the benefits and what the costs are. I think a lot of times we make decisions and policies that are well-intentioned, but there are unintended consequences. And I think those are the things that are not being investigated. Those are not being thrown into the equation when we're making these decisions. It's very easy to put a Band-Aid over something, but then what happens when you spring a leak at the other end? How many Band-Aids are going to patch that up? So I think, again, we have to encompass all things. We're not always going to be 100% right. In talking to people, I think the way you get to the answer is just try to get the best consensus. And talking to a lot of people, I think the concern I've met and hearing is that we need a different new blood or a different thought. Obviously, my career has taken me in a different path that has nothing to do with government. But I do understand rules, regulations, policies, procedures, medical practices, all of that. So I find efficiencies within those to get the best outcome. And that's what I want to do for the town of Groton.
So the irony of a doctor using a Band-Aid analogy does not escape me. I think that's great. What current board member do you find yourself agreeing with most?
I think I like, you know, my predecessor there, John Geiger. I think I've only met him briefly. I haven't spoken to him, but just getting words. I find the best way to find out about a person, just in medicine, you want to know about a surgeon, you ask the nurse, you ask the people that are around them. So I've tried to get a sense through the community. Obviously, you know, I have my neck of the woods. Everybody has their own little niche in our community in the different neighborhoods. But I try to probe them because I'm not as exposed as they may be or lived here as many years, and pick on their thoughts and as to why they think different things about certain people.
Right. So, you don't have a background, I guess, at least not in local politics. I haven't heard you involved a lot, but still people do this without a background in politics or local politics, but you have to draw on other experiences. So being a select board member sometimes involves some controversial stuff. What's the most controversial position that you've ever had to take as a professional? How important was that issue, and how did you go about making that decision and rolling it out?
Well, so, I mean, as an anesthesiologist, like I said, I do risk-benefit analysis. One of the hardest discussions is to have with a patient is that there's no good outcome. When you weigh all the risks and benefits, it's actually worse for them. And that really, at the end of the day, they're both bad situations. I'll use hip fracture is probably the best because a lot of people have impact in that in their own life. We know that you break your hip, you don't do well. And it's very difficult for families to make that decision. That's where we are, you know, in my head, I'm calculating the risks versus the benefits. And I will play it out. So I'll say to a family, I had a patient once who had, you know, metastatic disease, was bedbound already, had end-stage Alzheimer's, and unfortunately he rolled out and broke his hip. I had the unfortune of sitting with this wife for almost 4 hours going through this and explaining, you know, do the surgery, don't do the surgery, you treat with meds, every possible outcome so that she could try to make the best informed decision. But ultimately she looks at me and she said, you're the doctor, you tell me. And I said, that's where I can't, because it's a lose-lose decision. Not every decision is a win and lose. Oftentimes it's a lose-lose, let's try to lose less. And that's life, as we all know.
Got it. With little background in government or town politics, and that's an assumption on my part, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely correct.
Okay, are you sort of, does your candidacy diminish the importance and value or underestimate the importance and value of experience?
No, I don't think so. I think, you know, if you have a bunch of select board members with plenty of experience, a new perspective, I think, is worth that risk. At least it is in my estimation. You know, all these major revolutionary ideas have always come from one person not saying, I'm going to do that. I'm just saying, you know, it does take a certain perspective. There are a lot of things. I could use anesthesia because that's what I know. I've spent my life doing it. So every story somewhere relates to that. But the man who invented a device that we use in the bulk of surgeries was not an anesthesiologist to maintain the airway. And you think about that, we have these thousands, hundreds of thousands of people practicing this skill of anesthesia. And not one person said, hey, why don't I make that? And, you know, it's somebody that can come in and go, well, why did we do that? Oftentimes, if you stare at a problem long enough, it's just the same problem.
So let's shift a little bit to the economy or economic issues. Do you believe that the tax burden is growing proportional to residents' ability to pay? And if not, what does that mean to you? Why is it happening, and what will you do about it?
That's a big issue for me. Most of my friends can speak to that. Taxes are a big issue. I was just looking the other day, one of my neighbors had moved, and I looked at Zillow, you get curious as to how your property value is going. And I looked at the taxes, and my taxes have gone up, from 12 roughly, up another 4K every year with, I'm not sure what has dramatically changed in terms of services. And I think I was speaking to another colleague here, and I said, if you're a senior citizen in this country and you're in this town and you're on a fixed budget, you could actually extrapolate out how long you got until you have to move out because the cost has become too much. That's a scary thing, especially if you're at the end of your career and your idea was to sit down and enjoy and not think about the next problem. Those will always come, but that's an undue stressor that I think is a very real thing that happens when you keep on raising the taxes. So yes, it would be a focus, and that's where efficiency comes, for at least in my mind. I'm going to try to see the most efficient way to do business, and I believe town government is a business. You're taking people's money and you're providing a service, and I think it is incumbent upon us to try to be as efficient as possible. Not always possible, but if you shoot for 100%, you're definitely going to be closer to 100 than you are to 0.
Got it. Great. So sort of a little more micro here, employee wages and benefits are 60% of our budget, and they grow faster than our ability to raise taxes without overrides, largely because of the growth in benefits. Do you see this as sustainable? And if not, what will you do about it?
I don't. I don't think our path is really sustainable in the way that we approach our budget. It's, in working in hospitals, you spoke to my experience. I don't have anything in town politics or whatever, but I do have management of budgets for surgeries, centers, and as a medical director in my experience. And that's a very similar thing with numbers. It can be up there with, the cost of medical equipment to the same tunes. Certainly not our town budget, but I think you got to look into these things, and it's not sustainable, and it needs to be adjusted. How that gets done is not just a one-person show that comes in and says, if that were the case, that would have been done long ago. So this is a collaboration of saying, let's realize this is a problem. Let's put everybody on board, and let's see if we can reach a consensus that's fair, because that's the path forward. Otherwise, you're just on a bus that's about to crash.
It's a thorny problem, very, very difficult, very few levers to pull. So I don't envy anybody that's got to deal with it. Let's see. How do you feel about the contribution? This might be something you might be quite familiar with from the hospital setting. How do you feel about the contribution of nonprofits to the community?
I obviously, anytime a nonprofit is trying to help out our community, anybody wants to help, even if it's for profit. I think those designations often get lost in, they're nonprofit. No, well, the person running it gets a salary, so that's still somebody's profiting. But anybody who wants to help the town and to move forward into get a more sustainable future, that's always a conversation worth having. There are very few conversations that are not worth having. And if people want to disagree, then that's okay. You say we disagree, and then we'll just not speak about it because we know where we stand, and we get lucky, maybe we'll revisit.
Okay. Let's go to more community-based things at this point. Should the select board be involved in promoting or dealing with national social issues such as Black Lives Matter?
I don't think so. I mean, I think obviously, unfortunately, that's the age we live in, that you can't avoid it. It's there. People are talking about it. But as a person who represents the community, you should try to be as relatively even keeled as possible. You can have an issue, but that doesn't need to get broadcast I remember, for instance, when I first moved to this town, there were political signs in front of town hall. And that's not, to me, kosher. You're there to represent all people, not just some people or the people who work there or the people who, get permission to do so. But everybody needs to be, and I understand there's a personal place and there's a professional, and this is a job. You need to be more, you have to understand that. And that's my opinion. I think nothing comes good of broadcasting your personal views professionally in broadcasting, because it's almost, you're like soliciting in a way.
Okay. So moving on to Prescott, the Prescott School, there have been 4 votes on funding the preservation of Prescott School. What does that imply to you about the town's willingness to support the effort? And will you be guided by these historic votes as you consider future Prescott-related initiatives?
Oh, certainly. I mean, this town has a very rich history, and I think that needs to be respected. But at the same time, we still need to move forward. I think, unfortunately, there's this, let's just pause in general society. We could just pause because of Corona and all this. But unfortunately, life moves forward. It doesn't stay stagnant. So we have to respect our history, but at the same time, make the best decision for our future. Because, at the end of the day, everything to me is just a cost-benefit analysis. Certainly, those scales can be lifted because of a rich history. That weighs more than, just a single building that doesn't mean anything.
Okay. Last on the sort of community and social things, do you feel there are residents who don't feel represented or even maybe misrepresented by the use of the Bible in the town seal? And is this acceptable to you?
I understand how people maybe could get offended by that, but it doesn't offend me at all, and I wouldn't seek to do anything about it. It's, again, our history. The building's important to us, but not the seal. The seals, we're very selective about which history we're trying to save. And to me, we could always be offended by things. I could take offense, but does that make progress? Does that make anything better in my life? Or is that just my angst? My personal way of dealing with things is it's not worth, there are bigger things in life going on that I need to worry about. And most importantly, it's my family and keeping them safe and running than to get offended about that. I understand why people wouldn't. I would have a discussion. If that's what people feel more comfortable with, then I'm not going to take offense either way. I'm just not the type of person. I've seen worse things happen in life to people to be worried about that.
Yeah, I guess, and I don't want to belabor this too much because we do need to move on, but the key part of the question was, do you think that there are others who feel, who don't feel represented or even misrepresented by that sign? Certainly your positions and the way you feel are important, but the question is not necessarily about how one individual feels, but how a community feels and the people in that community. We can certainly move on, or if you have a quick response to that, I'm glad to entertain.
Yeah, my quick response is I haven't heard anybody really take any sort of offense to it, and thus wouldn't want to change anything. So, and the people that I've spoken to, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't I understood it was an issue. I didn't realize it was, and that's obviously something I can, talk to people about and see if that is, and educate myself about.
Okay. Moving on to conservation, and there were a lot of questions about conservation, but I really just have one here, boiled them down sort of all together. How do you feel about the rural? How do you feel about the rural character of the town, and to what extent you support spending dollars to ensure that undeveloped land stays undeveloped?
Oh, I love Groton, and that's why we're here, is because we have massive, amounts of conservation. I live right across from one of those beautiful places, and that's my sanctuary. I go back there. It's every day. It's sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and it's generally just me and one other friend, and we do our, and that's, so I'm very much, and my neighborhood is right in the middle of this, this haven. So I'm definitely on board of doing that. But at the same token, I think a lot of times there's inefficiencies in the way that stuff is being conserved. And I think that those are not to say that anybody did anything wrong. It's just we need to have conversations about the risks to conserving it versus the risks of, maybe looking into uses for it. And those are discussions. I have a specific example of how conservation has affected my life. The commission here has asked me to move my swing set 2 feet at the cost of the taxpayers of $1,500 to move a swing set 2 feet.
Okay.
So that's something when I talk about inefficiencies that I would be looking into. It's all fine. I totally conserve it. I think we should definitely have those discussions, and it's a beautiful place, and that's why people want to move here. But those other issues also have to be addressed.
I would love, if we weren't so constrained for time, I'd love to explore that because it probably offers a good opportunity for how to look at cost and benefit. We just don't have the time for that today, but it's a very interesting example. So let's move on to housing. So how important is affordable housing to you and to the town? And what are you willing to advance it? Because it really hasn't been advanced.
You're absolutely correct. I think it's a good idea, and I think it's a noble idea, and we have to take care, especially of the seniors and that kind of a lower income, more fixed income retirement communities. Those are a great idea, and those are the type of people that make the community, vibrant. But at the same token, the plans often don't follow through, right? So if you build these low income houses, then you probably should have some sort of public transport, right? Because we are in a rural setting, how do people in those communities get from point A to B? So now that's another cost. Do we have the infrastructure? The other one I was talking about was the, sorry, give me 1 second, I apologize. Anyway, I'll get to it. It's, but when you do these projects, I think, they had bought this town had bought, the name is escaping me. Is it Boynton Garden?
Boynton Meadows, yeah, we'll actually talk about Boynton.
Oh, okay, I'll get to that later.
But
that's my 2 cents on that. I think you have to worry about the infrastructure to be able to accommodate those people. You can't just put houses somewhere, and then how do they get around? Is there traffic flow that allows for them to come now that you're putting 25 more cars on there?
Okay. So to the issue of Boynton Meadows, the town taxpayers lost $400,000 on the Boynton Meadow project. The question that I had for you is really kind of specific. You can broaden it a little bit if you want, as long as you answer this piece. And that is, should the public have access to related documents and the legal status and communications with regard to the Boynton Meadow project?
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
That was passed.
Yeah.
Okay. And certainly while we're at it, if there was an example about the Boynton Meadows project that you wanted to go into to broaden your last answer, please have at it, but we could certainly move on if you like.
No, I think, that's kind of, people know what happened and that was there. I think it's important to not just put blame, but evaluate what exactly, it seems similar to me in my mind. What infrastructure do you have to make that bet, essentially it's a bet, I think those are the unintended consequences to well-intentioned actions. And then the accountability piece behind it. That's important. And that's that's something that digs at people when you hear reports like that. And those, that's the consensus from people I talk to, and that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I would like to address.
Okay. We'll move on to policing. Just one question on this, and that is there a need to examine policing in America and in Groton?
In Groton, I don't think so. I mean, I've had nothing but fantastic, just interactions with them. They're phenomenal. The fire department's fine. Everybody does a great job. So I have no problem with that. I think there is a conversation that we can have, but it needs to be toned down with less rhetoric. I think that is certainly probably something you can have, but I don't see it as a huge issue. It's not something that I spend nights worrying about.
In America or in Groton? Both.
Either.
Okay, great. And lastly, I want to talk a little about board performance, select board performance. What are the most urgent issues that you think the board needs to address? And what are the obstacles to addressing those?
I think, the obstacles are always money. Anything you break it down to, it's always, I need some money to do this project. So that's always a rate limiting step. But I think communication, as a physician, I can tell you that most people who are involved in a malpractice suit, when you ask them why they're upset, why they're seeking retribution, and this is akin to, townspeople and their level of angst, if they have some, towards decisions they're making, is that they feel that they're being bamboozled, that somebody's lying to them, that something's being misrepresented. I think the solution to that is, and it's not that the select board's fault, it's just hard to communicate to the townspeople in an effective manner. And I think that's something we need to address. How do we do that? I can just give one example over down by the transfer station. There's a compost heap, which I was working with, one of the concerned citizens who's also happened to take care of my kids when I was younger, and when they were younger, rather. And, coming together, they just feel that they were left out of these decisions, and that's the accountability. So how do we communicate? So the solution is now, how do we communicate? We get all parties together to making those decisions. So whether that be a weekly flyer that is compiled by these discussions or things coming down the pike, those are all things, especially in a digital era, we can look into, that people can almost use it as their news site, just like they do the Groton Herald or something like that. And try to just kind of, have a posting, whether it be Facebook or Twitter, one of these things to kind of say, these things are coming down the line. These are the ideas that we have. I think it was good to see, because a lot of the decisions, in terms of I guess they had given that vendor a 3-year contract, but because it was 3 years, you don't have to discuss it with the townspeople. But this is now a major thing that has upset a bunch of people who live near the transfer station. And so, there's those unintended consequences. Yes, we had to solve a problem. I'm not blaming that, but these are the things that 4 steps down the line, that's kind of what I do in anesthesia. If I do a case, fine, I can do the case. And I tell patients all the time, I can get you to the end. I can get you to the recovery room. What you do from there is what I'm telling you is going to be the issue. Your recovery will be the issue. Because I can't just do one step. There's no point in doing one step if you can't complete the task.
Okay. And really, the last question is, how do you, at the end of a year, your first year select board or your term, how would you want to be measured?
I would want the people of this town to say, hey, thanks, that was a good job, and I appreciate your efforts. Just like I tell servicemen that come in when I take care of them, thanks for keeping me safe, or thanks for, joining the military. Though, thanks, you did a good job, because as it's a lot of work, and you were there, and, it's work, and you didn't do it for pay, or it's just to make the place you live a little bit better. And I think we need more stability. I think we need to be stable and try to carve a path that is, more stable for the financial future first most, and, and for the kids in the school. That's, 1A of my focus of running a select board. So.
Well, thank you, Vikram. I appreciate your time here and your preparation for this. I know it's hard to sit here and answer a bunch of questions that no one has asked you before, or that you weren't aware of ahead of time. So hats off to you for taking the time to do that and doing it as well as you did. So I want to firstly also thank Ashley Doucette and the Groton Channel for all of their help with this, as they do with all of our programs, but especially for this one, which is a very highly produced piece at the end. So thank you, Ashley. I really appreciate your help. I ask viewers to post comments to this interview and all of these interviews. The insights that you have may be really quite valuable to other viewers who didn't think of an answer or the interview in the way that you thought of it. So please don't hesitate to provide some comments on this show and on all of our shows. And if you have something that you'd like Groton Matters to cover, please let us know. So with that, it's a wrap. Thank you very much. And please remember to vote on Tuesday the 25th. Bye.